Chapter 8. Cultural Crossroads. Because of these ancient trade links, Afghanistan emerged, not as an isolated corner of Asia, but as a vital conduit through which goods, ideas, and people moved freely long before the first known cities of history rose along the Tigris, Euphrates, or the Indus. Even in prehistoric times, the land that would one day be called Afghanistan was already a cultural melting pot, its valleys and highlands echoing with the footsteps of traders, pastoralists, and artisans from distant lands. This was not a place where cultures arrived only to replace one another. Here they met, intertwined, and reshaped each other into something unique. Its rivers and passes were not barriers but bridges, and its rugged mountains were not walls but corridors of exchange. The life of Afghanistan in those days was shaped as much by its position between worlds as by the people who called it home. From the southeast, across the Indus River basin, came ideas that transformed Afghan settlements from loosely clustered villages into organized communities with a clear sense of planning and shared space. The Indus Valley civilization, one of the great cradles of urban life, had mastered techniques that elevated the art of living in compact, productive settlements. Its influence could be felt in the grid-like alignment of streets in some Afghan sites, in the deliberate placement of wells and drainage channels, and in the use of standardized sun-dried bricks, each one carefully measured so they could be stacked in perfect alignment. From this same source came a refined tradition of craftsmanship, the making of beads from carnelian, agate, and faience, the shaping of painted pottery with symmetrical precision, the weaving of cloth on looms that allowed for complex patterns. Even the simple act of storing grain in raised bins to protect it from pests may have been an Indus idea adopted in Afghan valleys. Archaeological evidence at Mundagak, one of Afghanistan's most important prehistoric sites, provides a vivid glimpse of this fusion. Located in the Helmand River basin, Mundigak shows signs of organized streets, multi-room houses, and large communal buildings, features that suggest planning influenced by the Indus model. Pottery fragments found here bear painted designs, reminiscent of those at Harappa, yet with a distinct local twist. Stylized mountain goats, native Afghan flora, and geometric bands arranged in unique ways. This blend of familiar Indus motifs and distinctly Afghan themes illustrates the process by which foreign ideas were adapted rather than simply copied. From the west, the civilizations of Mesopotamia, Sumer, Akkad, and later Babylon brought a different kind of influence. While the Indus gave Afghanistan a model for settlement life, Mesopotamia contributed systems for managing complex trade networks. The Mesopotamians had long experience in regulating the exchange of goods, and their reliance on standardized weights and measures made them natural leaders in commercial practices. In Afghanistan, merchants began using similar systems, small carved stone weights calibrated to a standard unit, allowing them to conduct fair transactions even with strangers who spoke different languages. This was essential for a land whose economy depended on the movement of high-value goods. Foremost among these goods was lapis lazuli, the deep blue semi-precious stone mined in the mountains of Badakhshan. For millennia, this gemstone had been prized in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and later in the Aegean world for its vibrant color and rarity. Afghan miners, working in high-altitude conditions, extracted the stone in raw form, which traders then carried along well-trodden routes westward. In Mesopotamian cities, lapis was carved into beads, inlaid into furniture, and ground into powder for use as pigment. The demand was so great that Afghanistan became known in distant lands primarily for this single commodity. Much as certain modern countries are associated with oil or gold, trade with Mesopotamia brought more than wealth. It introduced symbolic systems of communication, early seals, inscriptions, and iconography. Cylinder seals bearing Mesopotamian motifs, found in Afghan archaeological layers, suggest that local elites began adopting these as markers of identity and authority. These seals, when rolled over clay, left intricate patterns of deities, animals, and geometric designs, some of which blended with local imagery, such as ibexes or mountain landscapes. The adoption of such seals did not necessarily mean full literacy had arrived in Afghanistan, but it marked an understanding of the power of symbols in validating ownership, agreements, or social status. To the north and west came yet another stream of influence, that of the Indo-Iranians, a loosely connected group of pastoralist peoples who roamed the steppes and highlands of Central Asia. Their way of life revolved around mobility, seasonal migration, and the management of large herds of livestock. Horses, sheep, goats, and cattle were central to their economy, and their skill in breeding hardy animals transformed Afghan animal husbandry. The Indo-Iranians also brought linguistic and spiritual legacies that would prove enduring. Early Indo dialects spread through interactions between herders and settled farmers, leaving linguistic traces that would eventually evolve into the Iranian languages spoken across the region. Religiously, these steppe peoples carried traditions that emphasized the worship of natural forces, particularly fire, the sun, and sacred waters. Such beliefs found a receptive audience in Afghanistan's mountainous environment, where rivers gushed from glaciers and sunlight-bathed high-altitude pastures. Over time, elements of these steppe religions mingled with local spiritual practices, and in some cases, with the more urban-oriented cults of Mesopotamia or the ritual traditions of the Indus. This religious syncretism created a spiritual landscape in which no single tradition dominated entirely. Instead, communities shared a spectrum of customs, some local, some imported, and many transformed in the act of cultural blending. By around 1500 BCE, Afghanistan stood as a thriving intersection of worlds. It was home to farmers who cultivated barley, wheat, and pulses in irrigated valleys, to herders who drove flocks between summer and winter pastures, to artisans who shaped pottery, wove textiles, and smelted metals, and to traders who carried goods across continents. In fertile lowlands, farmers relied on canal systems to water their crops, some of which echoed the techniques of the Indus. In the rugged uplands, pastoralists maintained watch over herds that grazed on mountain grasses, producing meat, milk, and wool. In towns like Shortagai, located near the Kaka River, archaeologists have found evidence of planned streets, granaries, and workshops that produced goods both for local use and for long-distance trade. Shortagai is particularly remarkable because it appears to have been an outpost of the Indus civilization itself, planted deep within Afghan territory for the specific purpose of securing access to Badakhshan's lapis lazuli. Its very existence underscores Afghanistan's role as a resource-rich region that other civilizations sought to reach, control, or at least partner with. Excavations there have uncovered Indo-style pottery, weights, and seals, proof that traders from the distant Indus heartland were living and working in Afghanistan centuries before the rise of great empires like Persia. The exchange of goods in this era went far beyond luxury items. Afghanistan also exported copper and tin, essential for making bronze, as well as semi-precious stones like turquoise and carnelian. In return, it imported goods that were harder to produce locally, fine textiles from the Indus, crafted tools from Mesopotamia, and possibly even exotic foodstuffs like dates or sesame oil. The routes these goods traveled were not single fixed highways, but a web of paths, some following river valleys, others crossing high passes, and still others skirting deserts to avoid political or environmental dangers. Every marketplace in Afghanistan during this period was thus a place of cultural exchange, as much as economic activity. A potter from the Helmand Valley might sell wares to a Mesopotamian trader who paid in silver ingots. A herder from the northern steppe might barter wool for grain grown with Indus-inspired irrigation. A craftsman might inlay a wooden box with lapis bound for the Egyptian elite. In each of these encounters, words, gestures, and customs passed alongside goods, weaving a web of cultural familiarity that stretched far beyond the Hindu Kush. The result of these centuries of interaction was the emergence of a distinct Afghan identity, not uniform, but bound together by a shared role as keepers of the crossroads, while each valley or highland community had its own dialect, its own seasonal rhythms, and its own gods. All shared in the benefits of living at the heart of a network that linked the Indus to Mesopotamia, the steppes to the Iranian plateau. This position would continue to shape Afghanistan's fate for millennia, ensuring that it remained both a prize to outsiders and a resilient home to those who understood how to live in its challenging yet rewarding landscapes. Chapter 9: The Legacy of the Early Period. This prehistoric and early Bronze Age heritage would shape Afghanistan's destiny in ways so enduring that even in the modern world, echoes of those ancient dynamics can still be heard in its politics, economy, and cultural life. The first and most defining legacy was geography, the immutable fact that Afghanistan sits at the meeting point of Central Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East. In the deep past, this geography was a blessing. It allowed for trade routes to thread through its valleys, for merchants to carry lapis lazuli from Badakhshan to Mesopotamia, for ideas to flow from the Indus into the Iranian plateau, and for pastoral nomads to pass through on their way to richer grazing grounds. But geography is a double-edged sword, and as history unfolded, the same location that made Afghanistan a bridge also made it a target. Every empire that rose in Asia, whether based in Persia, India, or beyond, would look upon the passes of the Hindu Kush as a prize worth claiming, not only for the resources within, but for the access they provided to other lands. This tension between opportunity and vulnerability is as old as the first caravans that crossed the region. The second enduring legacy was mineral wealth. In prehistoric times, this meant lapis lazuli, above all else, the blue gold that glittered in the crowns of Mesopotamian kings and adorned the burial masks of Egyptian pharaohs. But it also meant copper from the mountains of central Afghanistan, tin from further north, and semi-precious stones like turquoise and carnelian. These resources gave the early inhabitants something of immense value to trade, which in turn attracted outsiders. The Badakhshan mines were already worked in the 3rd millennium BCE. Their output carried in small but precious loads over treacherous mountain paths to distant lands. This wealth did not create sprawling cities in Afghanistan itself. The terrain limited such growth, but it ensured that even small settlements could plug into the grand networks of Bronze Age commerce. Over time, as the world's appetite for metals and gems only grew, Afghanistan's mineral endowment would continue to make it a magnet for both trade and conquest. The third legacy was cultural, the diversity and adaptability forged by centuries of exchange between very different civilizations. From the Indus Valley came the arts of planned settlement, skilled craft production, and efficient water management. From Mesopotamia came systems of measurement, the prestige of seals and symbolic markings, and a taste for intricate ornamentation. From the Indo-Iranians came the gifts of mobility, livestock breeding, and a worldview that valued the elemental forces of nature. These influences did not remain separate strands. They were woven together into a fabric that was distinctively Afghan. The people of these lands learned to blend ideas, tools, and customs from wherever they came, and in doing so, they developed a kind of cultural flexibility that would prove vital in the centuries ahead. When foreign armies and administrators arrived with their own systems, resilience was the natural outcome of this diversity. The earliest Afghan communities lived in environments that demanded adaptability. A village in the Helmand Basin could see its fortunes rise or fall with the river's flow. A highland pasture might yield abundance one year and scarcity the next. To survive, these communities had to balance farming with herding, trade with self-sufficiency, openness to outsiders with caution. They learned to read the rhythms of the land and to adjust to disruptions. whether caused by climate, trade shifts, or human conflict. Over generations, this became ingrained in the social fabric, a readiness to absorb shocks, a capacity to reorganize, and a deep memory of both hardship and renewal. Even in the prehistoric and early Bronze Age periods, there were moments of disruption. Climatic shifts could alter water availability. Rival groups could clash over grazing rights or trade routes. But the archaeological record suggests that Afghan societies endured these challenges not by retreating into isolation, but by reinforcing their networks. If one route closed, another was found. If one crop failed, herding or mining could fill the gap. This flexibility meant that Afghanistan was not simply a passive recipient of influences, but an active participant in shaping the flows of goods and ideas across the ancient world. As history moved forward, the legacies of this early era would manifest in recognizable patterns. The geography that once welcomed caravans would also channel invading armies: Persians, Greeks, Kushans, Arabs, Mongols, and others. The mineral wealth that enriched early traders would tempt conquerors from every direction. The cultural diversity that had made Afghan communities resilient would also mean that no single empire could ever entirely impose its own identity on the land. The resilience born of millennia of adaptation would enable Afghan societies to survive not only the rise and fall of empires, but the shifting tides of global trade, climate change, and religious transformation. In this way, the prehistoric and early Bronze Age heritage of Afghanistan was not a distant, forgotten chapter. It was the foundation stone upon which all later history would be built. The template for the country's role as both crossroads and battlefield, as both prize and survivor. The mountains still rose where they always had. The rivers still flowed through valleys that had been farmed for thousands of years, and the people still carried, in their languages, customs, and collective memory, the imprint of those first centuries of connection and adaptation. The Afghanistan of the modern age, with all its complexity, cannot be understood without first grasping how deeply these ancient legacies run.